Muraho,
Hoi.
Olá.
ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahoy.
Sveiki.
Privet.
Hallo.
Ciao.
Salut.
Hello.
And welcome to Policy Voices by Friends of Europe, an independent think tank with a difference. Each week from Brussels, we bring you powerful conversations with policy voices from around the world. Policy Voices talking policy choices.
In this scenario, we could see the president showing how risk taker he was. And in order to be portrayed as a loser, he tried to regain control of the story by basically getting everybody off the guards and saying, you know what, we're going to try to have a rerun of these elections, but these elections are going to be real and they're going to be about governing France. Let's see who's going to win them.
Hello and welcome to Policy Voices, Friends of Europe's weekly podcast on European and global affairs. I'm your host, Catarina Vila Nova. Today's show is all about, surprise, surprise, the 4 days election bonanza that is still keeping us all busy in Brussels. No silly season in Europe this year, with another 2 key elections taking place in less than 1 month. If Rishi Sunak's call for snap elections in the UK took everyone by surprise, well then, what can we say about Macron doing the same in France after the devastating result of his party? Some call it madness, others think it's a genius move of the French president to call the bluff of the electorate. And then, of course, there are the real consequences of these 27 elections for the entire Union. Because they are the European elections, after all, let's not forget. The European People's Party managed to hold on to its place as the largest group in the parliament. But the same cannot be said of the Greens and Liberals, who suffered tremendous losses. And what happened in the end to the far right? Were we right in fearing a massive wave to sweep the continent? There's a lot to unpack here. That's why I sat down with Alberto Alemanno. He's the Monnet Professor in EU law at HEC Paris, the founder of the Good Lobby and Friends of Europe trustee. Here's our conversation. Alberto Alemanno, hello and welcome to Policy Voices. How are you? Still recovering from the elections last night?
Thank you for having me. Yes, it has been a short night and a very dense day of analysis as the news and developments come up.
Mm-hmm. So first question that I have for you is, was it as bad as everyone was predicting? Was it even worse?
I would not say that is worse than what we expected, rather the opposite. Of course, there was an alarmist tendency among the media to say that the far right would have basically taken up the European project. I don't think this is what we have been witnessing, but this is not to dismiss the fact that for the first time in history, 25% of the seats of the European Parliament will be taken by parties that are very difficult to qualify under one label. I don't think the term far right does justice to all of them, but they are certainly nationalists, they are sovereignists, they are rebellious vis-à-vis the European integration process. And those parties are probably not gaining political power, but they're going to gaining some political influence. And this has to do with the fact that they tend to be quite disunited, so they're not going to be able together to form a majority or to even come together as a group. And therefore, this weaken their ability to actually influence as much as they could as a force. And I think this is the positive side of the story, the fact that despite their growth, despite their surge across at least 21 member states out of 27 of the Union, in reality, they won't be able to call the shots in the European Union in the next 5 years.
That's very interesting and a good way to start the episode and the analysis of the elections, because indeed there was the fear that there would be this far right wave that would sweep the continent, and of course what this would mean that they would be able to create a bloc. There were some rumors that perhaps even a third political grouping of the far right would be created, but that's not what you think it will happen. But the big shock of the night came on a national level in France, with Macron's party being completely decimated in France, which led him to call for snap elections. There's been 2 very opposing views on his decision. Some quite alarmists, thinking that it was a terrible idea, but others a bit more optimistic, saying that Macron is basically calling on the bluff of the French electorate. saying that, okay, this is what happened at the European level, but let's see if the same will happen at the national level. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I think to fully understand what occurred in France and the decision by the president that caught everybody by surprise to call for snap election, we also need to make a step back and to realize that these European elections have become more national than ever. And the European leaders, both on the right, Giorgia Meloni, or the left or the center right, or the pro-European camp like Macron, didn't hesitate to use these European elections for instrumental purposes in order to strengthen their own position. And they continued to do so. And in a way, these European elections, they took revenge of being used so instrumentally by delivering a result which is pretty shocking for a country like France, given the fact for the first time in history, at least in the Cinquième République, we can see a far-right party getting most of the votes. And in this scenario, we could see the president showing how risk taker he was. And in order to be portrayed as a loser, he tried to regain control of the story by basically getting everybody off the guards and saying, you know what, we're going to try to have a rerun of these elections, but these elections are going to be real and they're going to be about governing France. Let's see who's going to win them. And we all know that the electoral system in France is extremely polarizing because of these two turns, so these two rounds that will oppose more likely a far-right candidate towards any coming from the establishment. And this might create a completely different political competition that might actually resize the win that Rassemblement National just scored. And if it should not do so, well, at the end of the day, there would be a cohabitation. So we're going to see the government of France being run by probably Rassemblement National, while the presidency being held by Macron. And this might not last more than 3 years. There are going to be presidential elections popping up. And these presidential elections might not necessarily see Marine Le Pen or any candidate from Rassemblement National to win, because by then the French voters will have seen whether these political courts, who never had any experience of government, would be able to run the country. It might sound Machiavellic, but I think this decision has been very strategic, has been very well thought through, and this will have major implications not only in France, but it will also have implications in the coming weeks when the next European Parliament will have to be gathered and the groups formed, and also the top appointments will have to be lined up. It is pretty clear that the French political parties, including Macron and Marine Le Pen, they will be very distracted, and they will probably devote less time to Europe than they will in Paris.
Interesting. And would you then advise Scholz, the German chancellor, to perhaps take on the same risky move? Germany was another country where the far right, the AfD party, performed really well. And in comparison, of course, Scholz's party came in third. It was dealt a very, very heavy blow. Would you then also advise the German chancellor to, do another Macron move, or that would not play the same way?
This is it's a great question. I think the Scholz situation is very different than Macron's because it relies on a coalition agreement, a coalition government that has been more or less working, that has clearly not emerged as very strengthened by those elections. As a result, it has emerged as weakened. However, it is not risking to be pushed out to the current parliament in Berlin. Whereas Macron has been clearly losing a lot of grounds. Vote de confiance might have put his government out of the game as a matter of few weeks. So in a way, the situation of Macron is not comparable to that of Scholz. And this might explain why the political appetite to somehow factor in these European elections in Germany seem to be very reduced as opposed to the big gamble that Macron actually made.
Just a final mention on a specific country before we turn to the European level, because these are indeed European elections. Just a brief comment on what happened in Hungary, where the party of Viktor Orban, Fidesz, had its worst performance ever in an European election, still 48% of the votes, but the opposition party managed to score 30%. What's your take on what happened in Hungary?
Well, Hungary provides a very different story than the one we have just discussed in France or in Italy or in other countries where the political power is clearly shifting to the right. We see opposition parties that are trying to challenge Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is still making over 40% of the vote, but this is perceived in that particular electoral context as an underperformance. This has to do with the scandals that have clearly damage the reputation of the party of Fidesz, even among the most closest allies. And of course, the emergence of an opposition party that, as a matter of few weeks, managed to get 30% of the vote. And for the first time in the past 15 years, we see Viktor Orban being threatened from within, which is clearly a sign of pluralization of the Hungarian political system that has been clearly hijacked by the current government at different levels. And this clearly showed that, yeah, the European elections can actually be not only an opportunity for the far right to emerge, but also for progressive parties to challenge a dominant player that has not been played by the rules of the game, by eroding rule of law and by cutting the corners for many, many years to actually lose ground. So that's a good news. But still, we're going to have approximately 10 members of parliament coming from Hungary, belonging to Fidesz party, who are currently unaffiliated, and they still have to decide which part they're going to be joining. And we're going to have more than 100 of them that still have to be deciding who they would like to become once they join the European Parliament. So Hungary will be part of that puzzle in the coming days.
Absolutely. So let's start looking at the puzzle. And it is true what they say, that the European elections are just 27 national elections. And that proves that why we've been focusing so much up until now in the specific countries. But let's look then at the puzzle and the provisional results that we have so far. Of course, no surprises here. The EPP still stands as the biggest political group in the European Parliament. Can von der Leyen breathe a sigh of relief so far?
I would not say so. I think the von der Leyen second mandate is still a long shot. Von der Leyen clearly walks out of this election slightly strengthened as compared to when she walked in only a few days ago. The big show of the EPP in her country, of CDU in Germany, it is clearly providing her support. The same is true for Donald Tusk PIS against PIS, which provide this kind of support. Also, Forza Italia in Italy did better than expected. So the EPP clearly is growing, is providing a good platform for her or any other candidate to build a new political majority. However, we also have to consider that if the mainstream party that traditionally have been running Europe in the past 30 years, that is EPP, SD, and Liberals, have managed to get approximately 400 members out of 700. So let's say assuring a significant majority in the European Parliament, this per se won't necessarily translate into a majority vote supporting Ursula von der Leyen, and they don't necessarily translate upstream into a decision of the European Council to entrust von der Leyen a new Commission presidency mandate. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, I think, playing out in the coming days. I think the snap elections in France, they are not going to be a clarifying moment for Europe. They might be a clarifying moment for France, and they might likely delay the process, with major political groups, including President Macron, not taking stance on any of the presidential candidates before these elections will be decided. And we all know that the European Council will actually be organizing between the first and the second round of those elections. So I expect this to delay the current conversations, which are not easy, because we keep saying, I've been saying this for over 20 years, that the European elections are not fully European, because they do not only take place on different dates, but they don't provide an opportunity to the average voter to express their preferences at the European level. So they are just national referenda. But this time has become so dramatic that we don't really know, and not even the European main political leaders know, where the balance of power lies today in Europe. We have these mainstream parties having, on paper, a majority, but we all feel that they will need to get extra support. And we don't know whether they're going to go to the left ask for the Green support and perhaps part to the left, the Linke and all these parties on the left, which, by the way, have been doing quite well, or whether they're going to be tempted, as we all got a sense of in the past few weeks, towards the right, towards some members of the ECR, which is a group that has been growing under Meloni's leadership. And depending on the choice made by that candidate, who might be von der Leyen or might be anybody else, presenting herself before the parliament, there might be a very different majority emerging, and therefore different political priorities that will be identified. And I think that's really the heart of the matter today. Who will be the individual chosen to find this new political majority in this new European Parliament that looks so different than the previous ones?
And then the question is, if not von der Leyen, then who?
Well, I think by now it's pretty clear that to become a president of the European Commission, you need to be a former head of state and government. Von der Leyen herself, she wasn't. She was a minister of defense when she was appointed, but I think there is consensus. And we've been hearing a lot of names coming from both the EPP and the S&D, but we also heard some names which are a bit counterintuitive because they are not politically affiliated, like Mario Draghi, a more technocratic profile, who would benefit from the support of many political groups, regardless of their ideology, who might actually bring Europe in this geopolitically uncertain world into a more secure ground. So nobody can really be ruled out in this particular moment. All the more so should von der Leyen be selected by UCO, but not be confirmed by the European Parliament. That scenario would be phenomenal, would be unprecedented. But if the ball goes back to the European Council, it is pretty likely that none of the names that have been mentioned so far among political leaders will actually have a chance. It would be rather a technocratic profile like that of Mario Draghi could actually make it. And who knows, perhaps von der Leyen might still be retained as a president of the European Council. And this will change the equation, because then the socialists might have or might reclaim the high representative for foreign affairs. And this will put aside the liberals who have not done so well. And it seems that the ECR has just become the third largest group of the European Parliament. That means they could actually claim their own candidate in one of the top jobs. So this scenario cannot be ruled out for the time being.
And if indeed the new president of the commission is someone that is out of the box the same way that von der Leyen was nominated 5 years ago, will this then be the end of the Spitzenkandidaten process? Will we just rule it out completely in 5 years?
Well, I think the Spitzenkandidaten process was already killed in 2019. I don't think it was revived with a lot of seriousness in 2024. Nobody, not even von der Leyen, had any certainty to become the next president of the European Commission. And of course, the other candidates have even less chances. So more or less, the Spitzenkandidaten process has become a bit of a charade in 2024 with very little rule base, because there's no political agreement to pick the next president of the European Commission among the Spitzenkandidaten. And so it has already been killed in 2019 and 2024. I simply tried to revamp it, but with not real engagement by political parties. We don't have an agreement between the Parliament and the European Council on how to select the president. So we are far from that scenario, and only a European parliamentary system that would create transnational lists, that basically means allowing European citizens to vote for everyone in Europe in one pan-European college, would be able to Europeanize the political competition. The Spitzenkandidaten process was just a shortcut to get this kind of results, but it didn't work out.
And keeping in mind that, as you said, the ECR will be the third largest group in the parliament after the EPP and S&D, and taking into consideration the disastrous night that it was for the Greens and for Renew, do these two smaller parties, the Greens and Renew, do they have any legs to stand on in demanding the EPP to not make any deals with the right and the far right?
It is very difficult to find credible these kind of conditions that both the S&D and the Liberals are dictating to the EPP today. And the reason for that is that the European Parliament does not necessarily have to form a permanent majority, a fixed majority, before the President of the European Commission is selected and voted and elected, and not even to be formed after the College of Commissioners will be voted in office. That means that the EU could actually survive by relying on a variable or non-permanent or flexible parliamentary majority that would be formed on a case-by-case basis depending on the file that will be presented by the Commission to the Parliament. So I think it's important to realize that the parliamentarization of the European Union has been very modest. It is not fully fledged, and this allows a lot of gray areas, including the ballot box, which will be secret when electing the President of the European Commission, which will create a lot of uncertainty for the candidate, for the parties, and for everybody else. Those are the rules that are applicable to the formation of the next political power in Europe.
Alberto Alemanno, thank you so much.
Thanks to you for having me.
Thank you for staying on that side to listen to my conversation with Alberto Alemanno, Monnet Professor in EU Law at HEC Paris, founder of the Good Lobby and Friends of Europe's trustee. If you haven't done it yet, please take a moment to follow us wherever you get a podcast to never miss an episode of Policy Voices. And if you'd like to comment on what you just heard, you can send us an email. Our address is press@friendsofeurope.org. I'm Catarina Vila Nova, and I'll be with you again next week. Until then, goodbye.